Now I've got another fun one for you today. This one is called the Michigan Caddis. Now I know a lot of y'all probably saw the thumbnail and thought, that's not a caddis. Well, you'd be right. This is actually a spent hexagenia mayfly, of which Michigan has a very prolific hatch of in June and July. So why is this fly called a Michigan Caddis? Well, according to Eric Leiser in his 1987 book of fly patterns, he said some of the fishermen up there call this huge mayfly a Michigan Caddis. Now we don't know if they were doing that tongue-in-cheek, or maybe some folks thought this actually was a caddis, but lots of people up there still call that big mayfly a Michigan Caddis. Now, who actually came up with this pattern? Well, there's a little bit of controversy over that. Some folks say it was created by Art Winnie from Traverse City, Michigan, but according to Tom DeShanes and his Michigan Dry Flies website, he said there's no evidence to support that, so really we don't know who came up with this pattern. Okay, so notes on tying this pattern. It is not a quick tie, nor is it a very easy pattern to tie. Tying spent wings can be tricky, and spinning deer hair on small flies, well, that can be pretty challenging too. But I do show you two tools that can make it a lot easier, both by Stonfo and both available at J. Stockard. And the first one is their hair packer. If you tie a lot of flies spinning deer hair, absolutely worth checking out this thing. And the next one is their razor holder. Now, this thing is still a bit pricey, and sure, you can still hold a razor blade in your fingers, but it doesn't take too many accidents before you realize something like this might be worth investing in. So one last note, again, this is not a particularly easy pattern, but if you're a beginner out there and want to try it, go for it. Just don't be discouraged if it doesn't come out perfect. The thing's probably still going to fish. So there it is in the vise, a Michigan Caddis that is not really even a caddis. It's a big hexagenia mayfly. Now, I got a couple mistakes in this one that I will talk about as we go through the tie, so hopefully you won't make them. Now I'm tying this on a size 10, so it's a pretty big dry fly. This is standard length, barbless down eye dry fly hook. Now I'm going to start with black thread. This is a 140 denier. Since we're spinning deer hair, you need the thicker stuff. But I'm not going to catch it in the whole length of the shank, just going to catch it in right here in the back. Now the first thing I'm going to catch in is the tail, and it's just a natural deer hair. You know, put it in your stacker if you want. A lot of people will make their tails without even stacking them, and that's perfectly fine. But one tip here, take about twice as many as you think you're going to need, because we might end up, accidentally trimming some of these, cutting some of these when we're trimming the spun deer hair body. So let's catch this in pretty long, at least length of the body here. Okay, that is going to be fine. I don't want them flared up, so I want to put a medium wrap right there. Now a tighter wrap going forward. If you really want to bind them in, give your thread a clockwise spin and cord it up, and then this wrap going forward will really lock them in right there. Now let's go ahead and trim all this. Give us some room for spinning this deer hair. Okay, that's fine. As you can see, that tail, that's pretty thick. That's probably a little more than we want, but in the end, we'll see if it's all still there. So I'm going to go ahead and cord this thread up right here. And for the body, I'm going to use this spinning deer hair. This is, actually the more hollow hair that's made for spinning. If you don't have this, use regular deer hair. It'll be fine, but this stuff makes it a lot easier. So let's take a medium-sized clump of this, and if you've got one of these hair combs, this is a little Stonfo tool, very convenient to have. It might not look like there's a lot of underfur in there, but there is probably more than you realize. So just go ahead and use this if you can. If you don't have one, it's going to be fine, but combing out this underfur will make it a little bit neater. And so I've got my thread corded up here. I'm going to lay this across where the thread's hanging at about a 30-degree angle. Pull a lot of thread out. I'm going to put a loose wrap on right there, and then a second loose wrap right there, and then the third and fourth wraps I'm going to use to spin it around. Okay, now there's one thing, well, you can see it in the camera right there, is the back half of this deer hair is quite possibly going to get caught in that hook gap. So just pull these out with your bodkin, and we might have to do this on the second bunch we're going to do as well. Okay, that's a pretty big buggy back end right now. Let's put one wrap, zigzag it up through here, and then take our thread just a little bit in front of this deer hair, couple of wraps up. Now, the fun part. So it's just stacking it and adding more to it. Now, to stack deer hair, if you've got this tool right here, this is a Stonfo tool. It's quite convenient. It's got a small end right here and then a big end if you're doing bigger bugs. And if you don't have this tool, make one. You know, just take this is a cap from a water bottle with a little hole drilled in it. It'll work. You just push it on and pack it down. This thing is a little bit better because it's got foam insert in it and you'll be less likely to break any of these. And you can always do it with your fingers too. And this tool, if you spin a lot of deer hair bugs, definitely worth having. It's not expensive at all, available at J. Stockard. I'll put a link to it in the description. So let's go ahead and pack that in right there. And then take our thread up a little bit more. And I'm going to do that 3 more times. I'll speed this up because this, you know, it takes a good couple of minutes to get all these bunches of deer hair in. Now I know it looks like we're already crowding our eye, but watch this. We've got a lot more room up here. We can really pack this in tight. We just created a lot more space on that hook right there. And we might be able to get at least one more clump of hair, maybe even 2. Okay, I think that's enough. I'm not going to try to do one more. I do need a little bit of room up here for the spent wings and the hackle. But what you'll want to do here is go ahead and whip finish this thread off. Just, you don't want to risk accidentally snipping your thread when we're trimming this deer hair. We're probably going to finish the fly with a 70 denier thread anyway, so no big deal to go ahead and cut this off. And now comes the fun part, just trimming this body. If you've got this razor blade tool or a razor blade, this is by Stonfo, also available at J. Stockard. It makes it really easy. Now this whole next step you could do with scissors, but what I usually do is trim out the bulk of it with a razor blade and then just go back and fine tune it with the scissors. And keep in mind you want to keep the front of it thicker and then taper it back toward the tail, and just be careful not to, you know, accidentally cut too much of that tail off when you're doing this. Now I'm going to speed this up because this really takes at least a couple of minutes. It's probably the longest part of the fly right here. Okay, for the most part we've got our body kind of the shape we want, so let's just take our scissors now and then try to sculpt this to, you know, the shape we really want. Now the next thing we're going to want to catch in some Grizzly dry fly hackle, and this is make it about 1.5 times a hook gap right there. That should work right there. Of course we do need to catch in our thread, and I'm going to step this down to a 70 denier. Just make it a little bit easier when I'm catching in the hackle and the spent wings. So I'm going to catch in this dry fly Grizzly hackle right back here at the back of the head, right in front of this body. Just going to wrap it really right up against it. Just a few wraps forward and we'll snip the stem. Now we could go ahead and wrap this hackle, but I found it's easier to go ahead and tie in our spent wings. And if you're used to tying with a high quality whiting cape, you'll know the tips of those are a little bit too narrow. And this one, you kind of want something wider and fatter. So this is a hen, Grizzly hen, undyed. And I'm going to catch these in one at a time. My goal here will be to keep them kind of in the plane of the hook, or so it'll sit down in the water, but, you know, coming out 90 degrees from the body of the fly. So this might take a little bit of dexterity, but just work with this until you get them how you like. Okay, I think that one's going to be fine. Now it might be leaning back just a little bit, but we can kind of jostle it around when we're wrapping this hackle. Now if you leave the stems long on these, it'll help out because you can grab it by the stem when you're catching the one in on the near side. Okay, I think those look fine right there. I've got my thread right up behind my eye in front of these spent wings. Now we're gonna wrap this hackle. And probably, well, you know what, before we do that, let's go ahead and trim the stems from these spent wings right here. Now let's wrap this hackle. And I'm gonna do 3 or 4 wraps behind it, and then maybe 1 in front of it. We'll see if it needs it when we get there. Okay, let's go ahead and catch this off. And you can, if you noticed, I used that hackle wrap right in front of those wings to kind of push them back and keep them in place. And I think don't let that slip. I think we're gonna be fine right here. If I can just get 1 more wrap to lock this hackle in. Okay, let's go ahead and do 2. Okay, I think that's gonna work. I'm gonna go ahead and trim this off before I whip finish it. Now let's just whip finish this right behind the eye and then take care of any cleanup. Now I'm going to have a little bit of cleanup, and that's fine. Every one of these I've done so far today, I have had some cleanup. But you also want to trim the hackle on the bottom. Now the recipe says trim it on the bottom and the top. I don't think it's all that necessary to trim it on the top, but if you do trim it on the bottom, it will help this sit down lower in the surface film. And then these spent wings will be more visible. So let's trim the bottom hackle right there, and then go ahead and trim it on the top if you want or not. And I do have a couple of fibers right here, just up here in front of the eye, that I need to trim before I can put a little bit of head cement on it. But there we go, Michigan Caddis, a pretty cool looking bug. Now, one critique on this one is I trimmed that deer hair just a little bit short right there. You can see some of that black thread underneath there. But overall, this is a fishable fly, and I'm just fine with it. Drop a head cement, this thing's going in my box. So that's it, everybody. I appreciate you watching. Y'all take care, and we'll see you next time.